What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're going zero to producer. We're going from zero to producer in 90 days with Ableton Live. I'm your instructor, Torbjorn. Big thanks to Ableton for extending that free trial, Ableton Live 10 Suite for 90 days. We're wrapping up a project here today. Last video, when we got together, we were doing all of the sound design for one of our instrumental hip-hop beats. Talking about the sound design concepts, how to use different audio effects and audio effects sends. Talking about transitions between different song forms, beat drops, build-ups, stutter edits, and automation, always. Lots of automation. Well, today we're going to get into mixing, and hopefully we can demystify some of those basics today. So let's talk about something that we're going to need to download to make this a little bit easier. We're going to use pink noise as a reference signal, which I'll explain later. But before you dive into this, make sure you download either the high-quality pink noise file from the audiohack.net website, or Credland Audio has this free plugin called Pink that just makes pink noise. And you can choose how loud the pink noise gets. Nice and easy. Let's talk about some theory behind mixing. We're going to be doing quick mix references. And what that means is we're basically creating demo mixes. We're not going for perfection here. We're just going for speed in the same way that we were creating a lot of sketches really quickly. The three pillars of mixing that we're going to be talking about today are space. So what tonal or frequency space does a sound occupy? High, mid, low? What place does the sound occupy? Does it sound like it's close or far away, to the left or to the right? And my favorite, how does the bass sound? We've got low mids, we've got lows, and we've got sub-bass frequencies. Some instruments need it, some don't. We're going to learn how to make space for the ones that are more important. Let's hop over here to Ableton. The thing that we want to do first is separate all our drum clips. Drum rack is great for writing quickly, but it's not really great when it comes time to mix stuff. Of course, we can throw audio effects on the chain, but what we can't do, or what I don't know how to do, or what is easier to do if we split them all up, is things like using them for individual side chain source sounds. We'll talk a bit about that in a second as well. But for the time being, we've got 7 samples here that we need to separate out, and one of them can live in our original drum rack. So we're going to make 6 new MIDI clips for the 6 samples that we are going to move. And all you got to do is click and drag one of those cells onto a blank space, and it gets rid of all of those notes from our main drum rack and just moves them over to this new MIDI track. Nice and easy. So I'll do that for the snare and now our second snare. We've got a hi-hat. We've got another hi-hat. We've got a third hi-hat. And we have an open hi-hat. Just go through and label these real quick. Kick, snare 1, snare 2, hi-hat 1, hi-hat 2, hi-hat 3, hi-hat open. And now I'm going to click on my top track. I'm going to hold shift, click on the bottom track, and I'm going to group them. Command G or Control G will group them. It seems like redundant to separate them all and then group them back in here again, but I'll show you when we do that sidechain compressor why it's important to have them separated. Call this our drum group, and then originally, when everything was playing through this whole drum rack, now it's just our kick drum that's left here. We threw this OTT effect after it, and now, because it's only on the track that has the kick drum, it's not affecting the whole drum kit. So if we just click and drag that up onto our drum group, then it moves it onto the group, and it's now affecting all our sounds. We can go ahead and close that group up, do the same thing down here, select our 2 bass instruments, make a bass group. We've got 2 chords here. We can make a chords group. And then we would make a lead group, but we just have 1 track here called pluck, so it doesn't need to have its own group. That's all good for our setup. We're just keeping it super simple today. We won't need to do a whole lot more than that. Now we need to set up our volume. So I'm going to go over here to my plugins browser, search for that pink, drag that onto a blank space, and it's going to make a really unpleasant noise. I'm just warning you. That noise is all of the frequencies playing at the same time, except that they weight them so that the bass frequencies are a little bit louder. It's the most simple way to explain that. How loud that total sound plays overall is determined here by our noise level. And we want to turn our noise level to 0 and then turn our master level to -6. It's a bit weird that they give you 2 of them, but now what should be happening when I turn this on button is we'll see here on our peak meter on our track that has the pink noise on it. We can just color it pink, call it pink. When I press this on button on our pink noise track, it should peak at about -6. Pretty much exactly. So now what we're going to do is we're going to turn the volume of all of our tracks all the way down to 0, and one at a time, we're going to turn the volume back up until we can hear this noise at like about the same volume as the pink noise. All we really have to worry about is just turn the volume down, turn the pink noise on, and then turn your track up until you can start to hear it. And I'm going to do this as fast as I can. We're just going to do this one sound at a time. So now that I've got my lead, the right volume, I'm just going to turn it off and move on to the next track. Oh man, what a tutorial. All right, now that we've got everything referenced against the pink noise, unpleasant as it may have been to listen to that sound for that long, it's the fastest way that I know to get that volume sitting right on all your instruments. The one thing that we did not reference against the pink noise is the drums. So that's because we typically want the drums to be a little bit louder. So I've got some starting volumes here that I like to throw my kicks and snares and claps all at this volume. So we can just go through here, solo our drums. We'll maybe just listen to the chorus, just loop that chorus, and we're just gonna get the peak volume at the kick to be about -12, Snare and claps around -10. Hi-hats and percussion around -15 or so. I'll do the same thing here about getting that volume as close as I can, as fast as I can. Something kind of like that. Let's listen to it all together. It should feel like everything is relatively balanced. We may have to adjust, but it should be pretty close. So what I'm hearing is maybe the chords are a little bit too loud. We can drop those back. Maybe that lead pluck is a little bit too loud. Let's listen to our chorus. Let's listen to our pad in verse 2. Same thing, a little bit loud. What happens is that stuff that is in stereo, meaning that the left speaker and the right speaker are producing different sounds. Sometimes there can be some things that play tricks on your ears when you're trying to use this pink noise. So it's always best to do it fast, turn the noise off, and go back and listen and make sure that it sounds good. Moving on to step 3, let's talk about the bass. Kick drum and bass are the two things that need to occupy the low frequency space the most. They get priority. So we're going to be removing all of those low sounds from everything else except for the kick and the bass. We do that with an audio effect called an EQ. Ableton has a really great one called EQ8. Go over here to our audio effects. Let's start with our pluck. We're going to drag an EQ8 blank one on here. If you just click and drag EQ8, it will drag on there. I've got a little preset here called EQ8 blank. And over here, on number 1, this is our first EQ point. We've got all these different EQ points. We can turn the volume up or we can turn the volume down. But we're just going to switch this first one here to this curve that looks like this, and it's got the ×4. That is called a low cut, or sometimes it's called a high pass. And we're just going to solo this pluck sound. We're going to press play. And see down here, the left are all of the bass frequencies, and the right are all of the high-pitch frequencies. And you can see that it's got this little bit of extra stuff that happens down here in the bass. This is not a bass instrument. We don't need any of those frequencies. So we can put our low-cut filter on there, and we can just drag this all the way up until we start to getting to some part of the frequency spectrum of this instrument that is actually important. Now we've cleared up a little bit of extra space for our kick and for our bass. Let's do the same thing here with our pad. I'm just going to copy and paste this. Let's solo our pad and take a listen to that. So this pad has a lot of low frequencies in it, but we're not using it as a low frequency instrument, so we can still drag this up quite a bit. I would say if it's not a kick and it's not a bass, doing a low cut all the way up to like 100 hertz or 120 hertz, depending on the sound, is totally fine. All right, same thing. Let's copy and paste this onto our second pad, and let's take a listen to that one. So this is interesting. This thing shows us that we can high pass all the way up to like 250 hertz on this synth. But we have to keep in mind that in the intro and in the verse, it plays the keyboard part an octave lower, which means that the frequencies or the pitches, it's the same name for the same thing, different name for the same thing. When this keyboard plays an octave lower in the intro and in the verse, we're going to be cutting the fundamental frequency out of a lot of the notes because the pitches go lower. So see, we get those spikes around 150, 160 hertz. So on this one, doing a high pass at about 100 to 110 seems to be the way. Here we've got our respace and we've got our 808. All those things can occupy that low space, so we don't need to get rid of the low frequencies there. Here we've got a bunch of different effects. These things are pretty much all high-pitched sounds, cymbals and swells and all of those kind of things. So rather than EQing them all individually, I don't process effects a whole lot with audio effects. I'm pretty much just going to do this to the entire group, just so we only have to do it once. But we'll listen to a couple of the different sounds regardless. So there's our big riser sound. Definitely does not have anything important below 200 hertz. Let's listen here to, we've got some cymbals. That seems fine. Here we've got a crash cymbal. That seems fine too. And then we've got some little transition sounds. Again, very high pitch. Even when we go back here to the second verse. This one's a little different. We've got this impact. I think this one, if we opened this all the way up, we would probably find that it does have a lot of low pitch information. But we just don't really need those low frequencies from that thing. That happens at the same time that our bass comes back in, and we've got a kick drum that hits on that as well. All right, now let's EQ our hi-hats. We can just solo them one at a time. Definitely not a lot of low-pitch stuff in that one, so let's copy it up and listen to our second hi-hat number 3. Same thing. No low pitches down there. Hi-hat number 2. Same again, not a whole lot of stuff to worry about. Let's drag that onto hi-hat number 1. Awesome. Now let's double check our snares. Snare drums have some important information in the low pitches, but it's usually not as low as a kick or a bass. So we can usually still get away with doing that low cut / high pass all the way up to about 100 hertz. In this case, I think we can go up to 200, maybe 150. That sounds okay. Let's copy that over to our other snare drum, our main snare. We do get some bass frequencies in that snare drum, but we can clean it up. Because if you see where that biggest spike is, right here, that's at like 300. That's much higher than what we would need to cut away to make room for like a bass or anything like that. We can just leave it. Last but not least, the kick drum, we do want to low cut a little bit, but not a lot. 40 or 50 hertz, like at the very highest, I think, for most kick drums. Well, we just want to clear up some of that space for like our sub bass, because sometimes some bass sounds do go lower pitch than a kick drum. That's fine for now. That's pretty much all we're going to do to clear up low frequencies from things that don't need them. One thing that we do want to account for, though, is that our kick drum and our bass are probably going to play at the same time at one point, and those occupy the same space as well. On the whole, your bass needs more space than your kick drum does because it's probably happening more often, or the sounds are longer than like just a short, snappy kick drum. But that kick drum is technically a little bit more important. So if we go over here to our bass group and we drag a compressor onto that. Compressor, if you remember, is just an automatic volume control. When something gets too loud, it turns it down. But we can do this thing that's called sidechain. That means instead of the bass getting too loud and getting turned down, we can have the kick drum be the thing that causes the bass to turn down. This is called sidechain compression. Some people call this ducking. Basically, we're just going to press this arrow to open up our sidechain on our compressor. We're going to turn sidechain on so that that button is yellow. And here where it says audio from, we're going to go up and we're going to grab our kick channel. This is why we wanted to separate all of those drum tracks into their own track. Let's solo our bass. We're just going to drag this line down and you'll see that the kick drum hitting is going to start to turn that bass down. I like to set this to peak, and over here on our settings, I like to turn the ratio way up. I've got it at 10:1. Attack is quite short at 1 millisecond, and then the release I've got at 50 milliseconds. So just the amount of time that the kick drum is making noise, the sound from the bass is going to disappear. So it sounds kind of funny just with the bass, but you'll see if I solo the kick as well, that you don't get those weird feelings, those awkward sounds of silence and those clicking sounds, because that's the space that the kick drum is happening. So that's an easy way that we can free up space between the kick and the bass. Side chain compression. This is also a great thing to use for sounds with your claps and snares. If you're struggling to get those things to cut through in your mix, you can just free up some space. Let's move on to step 4, place. So sound recordings can be perceived as a physical thing. Panning, which is this button right here, gives us the sense of left to right. The amount of reverb that we have on something gives us a sense of how near or far it is. And I like to use this image here is a great example. Let's take a look at this. Here's some drawings about this concept of place in a recording that were drawn by Paul McCartney. So you can see here what Paul did, and I love the idea of this, is that he gave the person that was going to mix this recording a sense for what needed to be to the left, what needed to be to the right, and what needed to feel close and far away. So you can see here on this song, we've got things like vocals and guitar solos and piano are things that feel very, very close up in their recordings. But for us, this might be like kick and snare need to feel very up close and center. And if you've got a lead vocal or some type of solo instrument, synthesizer, saxophone, that might be something that needs to be up front and center. So think about what space your music is going to be in and try doing a quick drawing or sketch before you go into mixing this and see compare those two things if you feel like how it turned out in your recording matches this drawing. I think for the most part here, we don't have to worry too much about left to right or near to far. We've already added some reverb and done some things like that to this track, but it might be worth doing something called mid to side. This is a little more common, I think, in electronic music. Things that are in the middle mean that they're coming out of both speakers at the same time. Things that are on the sides are things that are different from the left and the right speaker. If you think about it, something that's coming out of both of the same speakers at the same time is going to feel very loud because it's up front and center. Both speakers are recreating the sound. But something here like our pluck sound that has a panning effect on it, this is going to feel very much not in the center because the sound between the left and the right speaker is changing a lot. I think the same is probably true for our pad sounds. Those have quite a bit of side information. But things that feel like they're too in the middle, ways that you can get them to feel more on the outside is either using a chorus. Chorus is a great effect that adds stereo information, or If you don't like the sound of chorus and you want something a little more transparent sounding that will get rid of some of that mid signal, grabbing a utility audio effect and then right-clicking here and choosing mid-side mode on gives you the ability to make it more of the mid signal or more of the side signal. So we could do this. We could just add like 25% more side to our group that is playing all of our chords. That will get some of that sound out of the center. We'll do it for both of them. And we can do the same thing here on our effects group. Pretty much everything else, we don't need to mess with a whole lot. If we wanted to, we could pan our hi-hats a little bit so we get some stereo information. The panning thing on Ableton is very interesting because it's not a percentage, it's a total. The farthest it goes is 50. So if you think about the number 50 as being 100% to the right speaker, then here going just 7 or 8 or 9 to the right is like almost a 20% change from one direction to the other. So that can be cool. Creating some separation with our hi-hat panning definitely helps. Kick and snare and your bass, keep them in the center. We don't need to pan those at all. Our effects, we've got this utility getting rid of some of the mid signal. Same here on our chords. And our pluck is already panning. So that pretty much takes care of the place of our mix. Just keep in mind that when you are listening to something in headphones, your right ear or your left ear only hears the speaker of the headphone that's over it. But when you're listening to speakers in a room, technically both ears hear both speakers. So what that means is when you're deciding how much to pan something, if you can check on speakers and in headphones, that can be really helpful. All right, let's move on to space. A lot of sounds take up the same frequency space as one another, so we might have to use our EQ to make some space for the more important sounds. For simplicity's sake, and because this is still just an instrumental track that we're mixing, we're just going to clean up sounds that are a little bit too mid-rangey, and we're going to make some more room for our kick and snare. So what I'm going to do here is a technique called mirror image EQing, and it's just a simple way of saying that we're going to look at what is loud in our kick drum and our snare drum, and we're going to create the opposite direction of those spikes on our frequency spectrum. I'll give you an example here, starting with the kick drum. So you can see here on our kick drum, we get some big spikes around 100 hertz. And we get a little bit of boost here around 10K. We probably don't need to do too much of that. So I'm going to grab this number 3, and I'm going to drag it up to exactly the height. I'm going to drag this EQ point exactly up to the height of where that is. I'm going to look here at what our gain says. 9 seems a little high. We probably only needed to do like 8. And then instead of being positive 8, I'm going to go minus 8. And then I'm going to do this EQ curve on everything that is not a kick drum. But before we do that, let's drag this over to our snare track, and let's find where our fundamental frequency is of our snare. Solo that snare. You can see we get a big spike here on our snare drum around 300 hertz. So I'll use my Q to narrow that up so that spike is nice and narrow, just like it was on the snare drum. And here we get about 4.5. So I'm just going to invert this. Again, mirror image. So instead of being plus 4.5, it's going to be minus 4.5. Just see if there's any other frequency here. We can add a couple extra dots. Maybe do number 5. We can cut something around between 1 and 2,000 hertz. Seems like there's a little boost of that on our snare. And that's probably good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click and I'm going to cut. And then every other track that isn't this snare drum or isn't this kick gets that EQ curve. Paste it onto our hi-hats. Going down the line. I'm just going to paste it on our whole effects group. Again, these sounds are all very similar sounding, so we don't need to necessarily do that all individually here just for our demo. I'm going to do this for our bass group, except that because our kick drum is this big number 2 EQ, we already kind of solved that issue with the sidechain compression. So here in this instance on our bass groove, I'm just going to turn that EQ point off because we don't need it to cut the space there. Let's put that on our chord group, and then let's put that on our pluck. Now we should have a pretty decent sounding mix that we were able to do in like 20 minutes. Let's take a listen all the way from the top before we save and export. We just want to make sure that nothing sounds bad, that we don't need to adjust any volumes for anything. Let's see how it goes. Once we get in the verse and the chorus, that'll be the real test. All right, let's hear how it sounds with the 808. It's great. I'm definitely clearly hearing all of the sounds. Feels like a layer behind the drums, which is exactly what we wanted to achieve. We'll just take a quick listen into this second verse and make sure that our different synth sounds sounded nice. All right. I'm being a little bit picky here, but I'm going to turn my Reese bass down a little, and I'm going to turn this pad up a little bit. And everything sounds pretty good. Now I'm just going to double check that we're getting the maximum volume out of here by using our limiter. So I'm going to press play on the chorus. That's the loud part. And I'm going to just turn this gain up on my limiter that I've put here on my master track. And that's going to make the final MP3 that we export just be as loud as it can be so that it sounds good and sounds loud enough in the car and on SoundCloud, etc. Seeing a little bit of this meter move, but not too much. Anything below -6, and we're going to start to hear it like squashing those dynamics, and it's going to take some of the quality away. But for now, about 9 dB of gain worked in this case. So let's go ahead and press save, Command S or Control S for Windows users. Make sure that our loop bar here is selecting all of the right points. And export. And that's going to be our final thing. I'll export an MP3 and a WAV because this is the final mixed version. We do want to have that option for the high quality one. Go ahead and save this to the desktop, Trap Beat project. We'll call this Mix 1. Save. Ableton will do its thing. And then we're done for now. Stay tuned for the next video. We're going to upload this online so that we can figure out who's going to be rapping on it. That's it for quick mixing. Hopefully you got some good fundamentals. Hopefully it was easy and a little fun. I know mixing, like I said, can feel like this mysterious dark art. Not everybody knows what to do or how it works, but hopefully we were able to demystify a couple things. And that pink noise mixing reference, great way to just find the right levels, balance out everything really, really fast with that reference sound. Space, place, and bass. Those are the 3 things that I always think about when I'm addressing a mix. Listen to other songs that are professionally mixed and mastered and listen for how they did those 3 things: their space, their place, their bass. We're just mixing sketches and demos right now, so we don't have to have everything be totally perfect. Stay tuned for the next episode. We're getting into SoundCloud, Bandcamp, putting your music out on the internet, and we're going to do our first campaign to try to promote our new beat that we just made. Big thanks again, Ableton 90-day free trial. We'll see you in the next video. Peace out.